Imagine a cell no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls are bare, the lights never dim, and the silence is meant to crush the human spirit. Solitary confinement is supposed to be the end of the line, a place where influence dies and power fades. But in reality, for some men, it's the opposite. From inside these locked boxes, gang leaders command empires. They move drugs, collect debts, and issue orders that ripple far beyond the concrete walls. Phones smuggled in under guards' noses, coded messages passed through layers of proxies, and brutal incentives to ensure obedience. These are the tools of a shadow economy that thrives behind bars. Tonight, we step into the hidden world of the prison kings, the men who run businesses from solitary, and the dark systems that allow them to scale power from the most isolated place on earth. The modern prison is supposed to be a machine for control. Designed with high walls, locked gates, cameras that sweep every corner, and a regimented schedule to reduce chaos to routine, it promises the illusion of order. Yet, beneath the surface, another order thrives. It is not written in policy manuals or enforced by wardens, but in whispered threats, coded gestures, and the exchange of contraband that carries more value behind bars than money itself. In this hidden system, the men who are locked away, stripped of power, and buried in isolation often emerge as rulers of empires, directing operations that stretch far beyond their cells. Solitary confinement, long viewed as the ultimate punishment, has not killed these empires. In many cases, it has sharpened them. To understand how this is possible, one has to first appreciate the nature of scarcity. Inside, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. A pouch of instant noodles can be a bargaining chip. A cigarette can settle a debt. A cell phone charger hidden in a sock drawer or beneath a mattress becomes a lifeline worth stabbing for. These items form the currency of an economy that operates parallel to the official system, unacknowledged yet unstoppable. And like all economies, it does not exist in a vacuum. It demands organization, leadership, and enforcement. This is where the gangs step in, filling the vacuum created by confinement with a brutal efficiency that mirrors corporations on the outside. When the prison gates slam shut on a man, the outside world does not cease to exist. He may leave debts unpaid, family exposed, or rivals emboldened. For those already entangled in organized crime, incarceration is not an interruption, but a relocation. The work continues. The address changes. Those at the top of the gang hierarchy know this better than anyone. For them, being sentenced to prison does not strip away power. It consolidates it. The cell becomes an office. The tier becomes a headquarters, and solitary confinement, paradoxically, becomes the quiet corner office from which orders are issued without distraction. The chaos of the yard, with its noise and constant surveillance, can complicate communications. Solitary, with a smuggled phone or cooperative guard, offers silence and control. The methods are ingenious in their simplicity. Contraband phones are the command centers, small enough to slip past inspections, powerful enough to connect leaders with lieutenants scattered across other prisons or free on the streets. These devices are worth thousands of dollars on the black market. Once inside, they are hidden with meticulous care, sealed in plastic and submerged in toilets during searches, buried in hollowed-out books, or carried from cell to cell, wrapped in tape under layers of clothing. One phone can sustain an entire criminal enterprise, allowing orders to travel across states, money to be laundered through bank accounts, and violence to be orchestrated with the tap of a touchscreen. Phones alone do not guarantee control. Networks of proxies are essential. Trusted inmates act as messengers and enforcers. They carry instructions, ensure debts are collected, and remind others that defiance carries consequences. On the outside, wives, girlfriends, siblings, and childhood friends become unwitting operatives. Some volunteer, believing they are helping their loved ones survive inside. Others are coerced, trapped by fear of retaliation. The chain of command flows seamlessly from a man in solitary whispering into a smuggled phone at 2 a.m. to a teenager on a street corner hundreds of miles away, selling a product he barely understands, all under threat of punishment if quotas are not met. What makes this system durable is not just fear, but a perverse form of loyalty. Protection inside prison is currency. Those who align with the gangs are promised safety from rivals, access to contraband, and sometimes even financial support for families outside. To reject such offers is to invite vulnerability, and in the violent, enclosed world of prison, vulnerability is often fatal. Thus, allegiance is less a choice and more a survival strategy. In solitary, gang leaders maintain relevance because their soldiers on the tiers rely on their name. That name commands respect, or at least dread, ensuring obedience even when the leader himself cannot leave his cell. The economy that emerges is staggering in scale. Drugs, primarily smuggled through corrupt staff or visitors, flow into facilities with astonishing regularity. Each gram of heroin, each pill of Suboxone, each sheet of synthetic cannabinoids is worth a fortune behind bars. Distributed through a network of runners and enforcers, these products fuel addiction, create dependency, and ensure a steady stream of revenue. Debt follows naturally. A man who cannot pay for his high becomes a tool, ordered to stab a rival or smuggle contraband on his next visit. The debt is never forgiven. It is repaid in blood, service, or exploitation. Violence is both the ledger and the enforcement mechanism, ensuring no one forgets who holds power. Solitary confinement intensifies this economy in unexpected ways. Removed from the noise and daily confrontations of the yard, gang leaders in segregation have the time and focus to manage operations with cold precision. Some treat it as an office, establishing regular communication schedules with their lieutenants. Others use it as a sanctuary, free from potential coups or rival attacks. What was once designed to isolate and weaken instead becomes a crucible, forging leaders who are hardened, calculating, and untouchable. The state believes it has silenced them, but the silence only amplifies their reach. The ingenuity of communication methods is perhaps the most chilling demonstration of this resilience. Beyond phones, gangs use letters written in code, folded into elaborate origami to disguise meaning, or hidden within seemingly innocuous messages. Some use legal mail protected from inspection as a secure channel. Others exploit corrupt staff, slipping notes during meal times or exchanging whispered messages during recreation. Every crack in the system becomes an opening, and the gangs are relentless in prying those cracks wide open. The very measures designed to contain them become tools in their arsenal. Consider the psychology of incentives. On the outside, corporations use salaries, promotions, and benefits to secure loyalty. Inside prison gangs, the tools are different, but equally effective. Fear of violence ensures compliance. The promise of protection ensures loyalty. Small luxuries, an extra meal, A packet of coffee, a chance to use a phone become perks that mark someone as favored. Brutality is not random. It is calculated, a reminder to everyone else of the cost of betrayal. In solitary, leaders orchestrate these incentives with chilling detachment, managing human lives as though they were assets on a balance sheet. Each inmate is weighed for usefulness, each act of violence justified as a necessary investment in control. Outside the walls, the influence continues. Families are pressured into laundering money, girlfriends into carrying drugs into visiting rooms, children into serving as runners. The reach of these leaders is not bound by concrete or barbed wire. Instead, prison becomes a hub, a central node in a network that stretches into neighborhoods across state lines and even internationally. Cartel partnerships are maintained from solitary cells. Local gangs receive orders from men who have not touched free soil in decades. What was meant to contain crime instead incubates it, allowing it to evolve with astonishing adaptability. The most disturbing truth is that the system knows. Officials are not blind to the phones, the drugs, the coded letters, the proxy networks. They conduct raids, confiscate contraband, lock down facilities, yet the trade resumes within days. Corruption within the ranks of staff ensures a constant supply line. Low wages and high stress make some officers easy targets for bribery, while others are coerced under threat. A single guard willing to carry a phone past metal detectors can earn more in one delivery than in a month of wages. The temptation is immense, and the gangs exploit it mercilessly. Solitary confinement, intended as the highest wall of separation, cannot protect against the weakness of human nature. As the prison economy thrives, its impact radiates outward. Neighborhoods hundreds of miles away feel the weight of decisions made in concrete boxes. A drug shipment is authorized, a debt is enforced, a rival is marked for death. These choices, made by men who are officially silenced, ripple through communities, feeding addiction, fueling violence, and perpetuating cycles of crime that predate incarceration and outlast sentences. The question is no longer whether prisons can stop gangs, but whether prisons themselves have become critical to their survival. In this paradox lies the heart of the story. Solitary confinement is meant to erase influence, but instead it sharpens it. The walls do not suffocate power, they concentrate it. A man cut off from the yard, from direct contact, from the daily grind of prison politics, becomes something else. A strategist, a remote commander, a king ruling from the shadows. The tools may be primitive, a hidden phone, a coded note, but the results are anything but. Entire economies are directed from rooms no larger than a closet, proving that confinement cannot strangle ambition and silence cannot drown command. Prisons are not silent places. Even in the wings built to smother sound, whispers move through walls, tapping patterns echo through pipes, and scraps of paper folded into tight slivers travel like messages in bottles between cells. Isolation is an idea, but never a reality. Where human beings are contained, they will always find ways to communicate. And nowhere is this more true than in the world of prison gangs. To understand how men in solitary wield such enduring influence, one must step into the labyrinth of signals, codes, and networks that connect a leader in a cell to foot soldiers in distant streets. At first glance, the methods seem primitive. Tapping Morse-like codes into plumbing pipes, shouting through vents, passing letters hidden in food trays or laundry carts. Yet these crude techniques are backed by a sophistication born of desperation. Prison leaders have all the time in the world to refine systems, and time, when combined with necessity, creates innovation. Messages are written in invisible ink using toothpaste or milk, dried and revealed later with heat. Complex substitution codes hide orders in what appears to be an innocent poem or religious verse. Even legal mail protected from inspection is exploited, attorneys acting as conduits knowingly or unknowingly for gang directives wrapped in the guise of privileged communication. But the most powerful innovation of all is the cell phone, small, sleek, increasingly inexpensive, and capable of slipping past security with alarming ease. It has transformed the prison economy from a cottage industry into a multinational enterprise. With a single device, a man who has not breathed free air in decades can log into encrypted messaging apps, monitor bank transfers, and issue orders with the efficiency of a CEO. Social media becomes both a recruitment platform and a tool of intimidation. Photographs of beatings are uploaded within minutes to remind rivals that distance offers no protection. Some leaders live stream from their cells, thumbing their noses at the system designed to bury them. For correctional authorities, the scale of this problem is staggering. Raids confiscate thousands of phones every year, yet within days replacements appear, smuggled in by corrupt staff, drones dropping packages over prison walls, or family members hiding devices in body cavities during visits. It is an endless arms race, and the gangs are always one step ahead. Communication is the skeleton, but organization is the muscle. Gangs are not chaotic mobs. They are disciplined hierarchies. Each prison set mirrors the outside structure, with leaders in solitary acting as commanders, lieutenants enforcing rules on the yard, and soldiers carrying out tasks from extortion to drug distribution. At the bottom are associates, uninitiated inmates who orbit the gang, providing services in exchange for protection or access to contraband. Orders flow downward like water, while tribute flows upward like tax. Every cigarette, every gram of meth, every smuggled phone generates revenue, a portion of which is sent up the chain to the man in the box. In return, his name guarantees protection, influence, and the backing of a machine that punishes betrayal with ruthless efficiency. The brutality that enforces the system is not random. It is ritualized, designed to communicate power in unmistakable terms. A debtor who refuses to pay is not merely beaten. He is made into a public example, attacked where others can see and hear, his screams echoing through concrete halls. The point is not the pain inflicted, but the message sent. Loyalty is rewarded with survival, disobedience with suffering. Even solitary leaders orchestrate this spectacle, using trusted lieutenants as executioners. One whispered order becomes a stabbing in the shower, a throat cut in the yard, or a fire in a rival's cell. Violence is language, and in the prison economy, it speaks louder than any word. Yet, fear alone cannot sustain an empire. What makes these structures resilient is their ability to provide stability in an environment defined by chaos. To new inmates, confused and terrified, gangs offer clarity, rules to follow, a family to belong to, a code of behavior enforced with consistency, however brutal. They provide protection from predators, access to scarce resources, and a sense of identity. In a system where the state cannot guarantee safety, the gangs fill the vacuum. They become both the predators and the police, extorting and protecting, punishing and rewarding, building legitimacy in the very spaces the institution fails to control. For many inmates, the choice is not between good and evil, but between survival and victimhood. From solitary, leaders maintain this legitimacy through myth and reputation. Stories of their past violence, their cunning, their ability to outsmart guards and orchestrate hits circulate through the prison like folklore. Their names are carved into walls, whispered in hushed tones, invoked as warnings. A leader who has survived years in solitary without breaking becomes more than a man. He becomes a legend, a symbol of endurance and power. The legend itself enforces obedience. No soldier wants to be the one who defied the man whose orders carry the weight of inevitability. But legends alone do not keep the money flowing. For that, meticulous organization is required. Gangs track debts with the precision of accountants. Ledgers are kept on scraps of paper, hidden in law books, or memorized through complex systems of mnemonics. Each debtor's name, amount owed, and due date is recorded. Payments are collected in commissary items, smuggled contraband, or through Western Union transfers made by family on the outside. Nothing is forgotten, and nothing is forgiven. The debt economy sustains the gang's grip, ensuring a constant flow of income and a steady supply of disposable soldiers willing to commit violence to erase what they owe. Scaling the system beyond prison walls requires proxies, and here the ingenuity becomes chilling. Families are conscripted as foot soldiers, girlfriends instructed to smuggle drugs or collect money, children ordered to carry packages or serve as lookouts. Sometimes the coercion is subtle, framed as loyalty to a loved one. Other times it is explicit. Refusal means harm to the inmate or the family itself. The line between voluntary and coerced is blurred, but the outcome is the same. Entire households become extensions of the prison economy. The man in solitary becomes the hub of a wheel, each spoke extending into the outside world, turning neighborhoods into satellites of his control. Authorities, in their attempts to sever these connections, often find themselves inadvertently strengthening them. Transfers designed to isolate leaders simply spread their influence to new facilities, planting seeds of loyalty and fear in fresh soil. Solitary confinement meant to silence grants mystique. Crackdowns on phones temporarily disrupt communication, but the scarcity only increases their value, making them even more desirable and profitable. Each new barrier becomes a challenge, and each challenge is met with innovation. In this endless dance, the gangs adapt faster than the institutions designed to contain them. What emerges is not just a hidden economy, but a shadow government. The gangs regulate behavior, adjudicate disputes, and enforce order. They determine who can enter the yard, who can live in which cell, who must be punished, and who may be protected. Their influence extends to racial politics, aligning inmates along lines of ethnicity and geography, turning the prison into a fractured landscape ruled by parallel sovereignties. And at the top of these sovereignties are the men in solitary, orchestrating everything from their isolation chambers. The irony is as sharp as it is unsettling. Solitary confinement, once envisioned as the ultimate tool of state power, becomes the throne room of the underworld. The silence that was supposed to crush spirits becomes the canvas upon which leaders paint their dominance. Each intercepted phone Each confiscated note, each discovered plot is proof not of failure, but of resilience. The system cannot kill the gangs because the system created the conditions for their birth. Scarcity breeds economy, chaos breeds order, and isolation breeds kings. Power, once established, rarely stays contained. In the world of prison gangs, control over a single tier or a solitary block is only the beginning. The real ambition lies in extending influence outward, turning a local operation into something that resembles a corporate franchise. What makes this transformation chilling is that it begins in the most unlikely of places. A 6 by 8 foot cell, stripped of possessions, stripped of contact, and intended to strip away humanity itself. Yet, within these walls, through ingenuity, violence, and relentless will, men orchestrate networks that reach far beyond the gates, blurring the line between prison politics and the criminal underworld of the free world. The mechanics of this expansion begin with the communication. A leader in solitary cannot walk the yard, cannot meet face to face with his captains, cannot directly supervise the daily trade in drugs or contraband, but through a contraband phone, he can be everywhere at once. Calls are placed not just to lieutenants inside other facilities, but to operatives on the streets. Bank accounts are monitored, wire transfers are ordered, codes are passed to ensure secrecy. Innocent conversations laced with hidden meaning, everyday phrases transformed into commands that can launch assaults or authorize shipments. Encrypted apps make interception nearly impossible, while disposable SIM cards and rotating devices ensure that even if one phone is seized, the network remains intact. Scaling outward requires more than communication. It requires structure. The prison gang evolves into something resembling a multinational corporation with divisions, managers, and workers, each performing a specialized role. At the top sits the leader in solitary, issuing broad strategies. Beneath him, lieutenants manage specific facilities, controlling drug distribution, extortion rackets, and enforcement teams. Further down are the soldiers responsible for collecting debts, smuggling contraband, and carrying out orders with ruthless precision. On the outside, civilian associates handle logistics, laundering money, purchasing supplies, and funneling profits back into the organization. In some cases, entire families become ensnared, each member performing a role, one moving cash, another transporting drugs, another holding property in their name. The business models are diverse but always brutal. Narcotics remain the backbone, smuggled into prisons through corrupt staff, drone drops or visiting rooms. Drugs are sold at exorbitant prices to inmates desperate for escape. The profits are extraordinary. What costs $10 on the street can fetch $100 behind bars. This margin funds everything else, from bribes to weapons to luxuries that sustain loyalty. Outside, gangs maintain drug distribution networks in neighborhoods, ensuring that supply lines remain strong. Money flows back into prison accounts, sometimes disguised as commissary deposits, sometimes laundered through businesses set up in relatives' names. Every step of the process is designed to both enrich the gang and reinforce its leader's control. Extortion is equally profitable. Inmates unable to pay debts are ordered to have their families send money on their behalf. A mother, already struggling, receives a call telling her to wire funds to an account or her son will be harmed. A girlfriend is instructed to smuggle drugs on her next visit or face retribution. Fear becomes a commodity. traded like any other, generating revenue through threats that echo from cell blocks to living rooms far outside prison walls. What begins as a transaction inside prison quickly metastasizes into a burden on entire communities, pulling them deeper into cycles of crime and coercion. Perhaps the most disturbing element of this expansion is the ability to order violence beyond the walls. A leader in solitary does not need to wield the knife himself. He simply needs to speak. A coded message can travel from his cell to the streets in hours, resulting in shootings, stabbings, or arson miles away. Rivals are eliminated, debts enforced, betrayals punished, all orchestrated by a man who technically lives in total isolation. The violence is not random but strategic, reinforcing the gang's reputation for ruthlessness and reminding everyone that distance offers no protection. To disobey an order from solitary is to invite a death sentence, carried out not by the man himself, but by the loyal machinery of his organization. These networks do not remain confined to one prison system. Transfers meant to break up gangs often spread their influence instead, as loyal soldiers carry the message into new facilities, establishing fresh outposts. A leader's authority may extend across states, connecting different institutions into a single web of control. In some cases, international ties emerge, with prison leaders negotiating directly with cartels or foreign suppliers. The cell becomes a boardroom, the gang a corporation, the product a global commodity. The irony is devastating. The very systems built to fragment gangs often serve as conduits for their growth. But this growth comes at immense human cost. For inmates, the choice is stark. Align with the gang and find protection, or stand alone and face vulnerability. Many have little say in the matter. Young offenders, barely adults, arrive terrified and unprepared, only to be told that survival requires allegiance. Refusal invites immediate violence, sometimes fatal. Compliance means a lifetime of servitude, with debts that never vanish and orders that cannot be questioned. A man may enter prison hoping to serve his time quietly, but in reality he becomes a pawn in an economy he cannot escape. Families on the outside bear an equally heavy burden. Wives, girlfriends, mothers, and siblings become conduits for contraband and cash, pressured to risk their freedom to sustain their loved ones. Some comply out of loyalty, others out of fear, still others because refusal might mean harm to the inmate inside. The cycle corrodes entire households, drawing children into the gang's orbit. Sons deliver packages. Daughters deposit money. What begins as support for a loved one becomes complicity in a criminal empire. The reach of solitary confinement extends not just into prison yards, but into kitchens and bedrooms, reshaping family life around the demands of men who remain locked behind steel doors. Communities, too, pay the price. Neighborhoods already burdened by poverty and crime find themselves tethered to the commands of incarcerated leaders. Local dealers work not for themselves, but for men in cells hundreds of miles away. Violence erupts at the whim of orders passed down from isolation units. Addiction spreads as gangs push drugs to generate profits. Money that could sustain families is funneled into tribute payments. In this way, the prison does not simply contain crime. It exports it, feeding cycles of violence and despair that extend far beyond the perimeter fence. Authorities wage a constant battle against this shadow empire, yet their efforts often resemble fighting smoke. Phones are confiscated by the thousands, only to be replaced within days. Raids on solitary cells uncover ledgers, coded notes, and contraband, but the networks persist. New leaders emerge, old leaders adapt, and the cycle continues. Corruption within correctional staff remains a critical weakness. Underpaid, overworked, and often disillusioned, guards become easy targets for bribery. A single officer willing to smuggle in a phone or a package of drugs can sustain an entire operation. For some, the temptation of a quick payout outweighs the risk. For others, threats leave no choice. The line between enforcement and participation blurs, and the gangs exploit it relentlessly. The persistence of these operations raises unsettling questions about the nature of incarceration itself. If solitary confinement cannot silence leaders, if the walls cannot contain their influence, then what purpose does prison truly serve? Rather than dismantling gangs, the system seems to harden them, transforming local thugs into strategists, turning violent men into mythic figures whose power grows with each failed attempt to isolate them. The state may hold their bodies, but their reach extends unchecked, reshaping both prison culture and the world outside. The narrative of control is exposed as an illusion. For the public, prisons are imagined as fortresses, where order is absolute, where punishment severs criminal ties, where society is protected by steel and concrete. The reality is darker. Those same prisons function as incubators of organization, laboratories of control, and boardrooms of shadow economies. From solitary cells, men build networks that rival corporations in structure and cartels in influence. Their empires feed on the very system meant to contain them, proving that confinement is not an end, but a beginning. And behind every transaction, every coded message, every act of violence ordered from a box in the ground, lies the same unsettling truth. Prison does not end the business. It scales it. The walls meant to silence instead amplify. The cells meant to contain instead concentrate. Solitary confinement, the ultimate symbol of isolation, becomes the crucible in which empires are forged. And while the world outside sleeps, believing the system has control, these empires continue to grow, powered by fear, loyalty, and the simple fact that even in silence, voices find a way to be heard. Prison is supposed to shrink a man's world. Concrete walls, narrow corridors, locked doors, and the ever-present eye of surveillance cameras reduce life to a handful of predictable motions. But for those who learn to bend the system, prison becomes the opposite, a launch pad from which influence expands outward like ripples in water. Solitary confinement, far from extinguishing this influence, often gives it shape and focus. Deprived of distractions, leaders transform their cells into war rooms, and from those rooms they stretch their reach across states, across borders, and into realms of power that the free world never imagined possible. The first step in scaling beyond prison is building resilience within. Leaders understand that their personal survival depends on continuity of command. If they are transferred, isolated, or even killed, the machine must keep moving. To achieve this, they establish systems of delegation that mirror military hierarchies. Captains oversee entire yards. Lieutenants control smaller units, distributing drugs, collecting debts, and managing soldiers. Beneath them, enforcers handle the daily violence that ensures discipline. At the bottom are associates, sometimes unaffiliated inmates coerced into service. Each tier knows only as much as it needs to, minimizing the damage if someone talks. This pyramid structure allows the gang to function like a corporation, with the solitary leader as CEO, the lieutenants as department heads, and the soldiers as employees. But unlike legitimate corporations where failure means bankruptcy, in this world, failure means death. Incentives are crafted from both ends of the spectrum. Loyalty is rewarded with protection, financial gain, and prestige, while betrayal is punished with violence swift and spectacular. Even in solitary, leaders can enforce these outcomes. A phone call to a lieutenant results in a stabbing in the shower. A coded note leads to an inmate found hanging in his cell, whether by his own hand or someone else's. Rumors of these punishments spread quickly, feeding a climate of fear that ensures obedience long after the blood is cleaned away. Scaling outward requires adapting to the state's countermeasures. Authorities move leaders between facilities to break their influence, but each transfer becomes an opportunity. A relocated leader plants seeds in new soil, recruiting fresh soldiers, forging alliances, and spreading his gang's influence to places it had not reached before. What was meant to fragment the organization only spreads it wider. Over time, entire state prison systems find themselves infected, their yards divided into territories controlled not by wardens, but by men in isolation cells. When transfers cross state lines, the contagion spreads further, creating networks that span regions and link into larger national structures. International ties emerge naturally. Drugs, the lifeblood of prison economies, rarely originate within prison walls. They come from outside cartels, trafficked across borders, and smuggled through corrupt channels into facilities. Prison leaders, hungry to secure steady supply lines, establish direct connections with cartel representatives. These relationships are symbiotic. Cartels gain access to distribution networks inside prisons and on the streets, while gangs gain reliable product and protection for their families outside. A leader in solitary may spend hours on a smuggled phone negotiating shipments with men thousands of miles away. The deals are real, the money substantial, and the risks extraordinary. But the isolation cell does not diminish ambition. It sharpens it. Technology accelerates this growth. Drones buzz over prison yards at night, dropping packages of drugs and phones with surgical precision. Encrypted messaging apps allow leaders to bypass the state's monitoring systems. Banking apps and cryptocurrency enable the laundering of funds at a scale unthinkable a decade ago. Each innovation is quickly adapted to the prison context. A leader who once relied on handwritten notes folded into origami now commands an empire with the same tools used by global corporations: instant messaging, digital ledgers, and real-time surveillance through social media. The irony is painful. While society views these men as relics locked away from modern life, they wield modern technology with more efficiency than many free citizens. The state, in turn, scrambles to respond. Task forces are assembled, phones confiscated, drones shot down, accounts frozen. Yet each victory is temporary. The gangs adapt faster than the bureaucracy. A phone seized is replaced the next week. A compromised smuggling route is rerouted through a different guard or visitor. Even mass lockdowns, intended to suffocate gang operations, often backfire, giving leaders in solitary, uninterrupted time to refine their systems while their soldiers on the yard grow more desperate and dependent. Each crackdown fuels further adaptation, and in this Darwinian environment, only the most ruthless and innovative survive. What emerges is something beyond crime. It is governance. Inside prison, gangs regulate life in ways the state cannot. They control who can live in which cell, who can walk which yard, who must be attacked, and who is spared. They adjudicate disputes with violence, but also with rules. To belong to a gang is to follow a code, often written down like a constitution, dictating behavior, loyalty, and punishment. For many inmates, the gang provides more structure than the state ever did in their free lives. This governance does not end at the prison gates. It extends into neighborhoods where families and associates follow orders passed down from solitary. The leader's word becomes law, binding not only soldiers, but entire communities. This law is enforced through brutality, but it also offers a twisted form of stability. In neighborhoods plagued by poverty, unemployment, and neglect, gangs provide jobs, illegal, dangerous, but jobs nonetheless. They offer protection, however extortionate. They create networks of belonging for young men otherwise adrift. The price is steep. Obedience, loyalty, and the willingness to commit violence on command. But for many, it is a price they feel they cannot refuse. Thus, the power of solitary leaders extends far beyond prison walls, shaping the lives of people who have never set foot inside a facility. The cost is borne by society. Violence spills from the yards into the streets. Drug epidemics are fueled by prison-based networks that reach deep into cities and towns. Families are broken, coerced into complicity, or destroyed by addiction and debt. Correctional systems hemorrhage resources trying to contain a problem they cannot eradicate. The public, largely unaware, assumes that prisons are fortresses of control, when in reality they are nerve centers of criminal innovation. The men in solitary, far from silenced, become the architects of chaos. Perhaps the most chilling truth is that the system itself becomes complicit. Corruption among staff is not an aberration, but a structural weakness. Low wages, long hours, and dangerous conditions create fertile ground for bribery and coercion. A single guard smuggling in a phone or a package of drugs may be the difference between an empire collapsing and thriving. For some officers, the temptation is financial. For others, threats against their families leave no choice. The gangs know this, and they exploit it mercilessly. The state cannot stop the corruption because the conditions that produce it are baked into the system. In this way, the very institutions designed to contain crime become its unwitting partners. As solitary leaders expand their reach, they become mythic figures. Their names are spoken with fear and reverence, their reputations exaggerated with each story told. An order given in a whisper becomes legend by the time it reaches the yard. These legends cross prison gates, carried by soldiers on parole, by relatives in visiting rooms, by coded letters smuggled out in legal mail. The legend itself enforces discipline, creating an aura of inevitability around the leader's power. To oppose him is not just to risk punishment, but to challenge a myth, and myths are harder to kill than men. In the end, the paradox is stark. Solitary confinement was meant to end influence, to crush spirits, to erase men from the networks they once commanded. Instead, it has become the crucible in which influence is refined, spirits are hardened, and networks grow stronger. From these cells, leaders scale their empires across states and borders, weaving together systems of communication, organization, and brutality that rival legitimate institutions. The state locks the door, but the gangs hold the key, not to escape, but to power. And as long as scarcity breeds economy, as long as corruption creates opportunity, as long as isolation fosters myth, the men in solitary will continue to rule, not despite the prison system, but because of it. Solitary confinement is often described as a cage within a cage. The walls are closer, the rules stricter, the silence more complete. It is a place designed to shrink human beings into shadows of themselves, but for some men it becomes the furnace in which power is purified and sharpened. After years in the box, their influence should be a memory. Instead, it thrives. Their voices travel further than the prison gates, crossing state lines, national borders, and oceans. Their orders dictate life and death for people they will never meet. They are the kings of cells built to destroy kings, and their empires endure longer than most governments. The roots of this paradox lie in a simple truth. Control does not require presence. It requires communication, loyalty, and fear. Solitary cannot erase these. Phones slip through security with astonishing regularity, tucked into packages, smuggled by corrupt staff, or dropped by drones. Once inside, they are lifelines, turning concrete tombs into command centers. A leader with a working phone is more dangerous than a free man without one. From his mattress, he can direct operations that ripple through yards, neighborhoods, and entire cities. The walls cannot contain his words, and his words are his empire. But words alone are not enough. To endure, a leader must institutionalize himself. He becomes more than a man. He becomes a system. Rules are codified into written constitutions, sometimes elaborate documents that dictate behavior down to the smallest detail. These codes outlive their authors, carried forward by successors trained to mimic the original command. A dead leader may be mourned, but his system continues as though he still breathes. In this way, solitary kings achieve a form of immortality, embedding their power in structures that survive beyond their physical presence. Consider the case of prison gangs that began as small groups of protection. In their infancy, they were survival strategies against predation, ways for men to find solidarity in hostile environments. Over time, those strategies evolved into bureaucracies of violence. Hierarchies formed, rules solidified, rituals emerged. By the time their leaders were locked in solitary, the gangs had become states within states. The men in isolation cells no longer needed to fight for their own survival. Their organizations fought for them. The very confinement that was meant to erase them ended up elevating them because it freed them from the petty distractions of daily prison life. They could devote themselves entirely to governance, to the architecture of crime. The longer they endure, the deeper their roots grow outside prison. Families, once passive victims of incarceration, become active participants in the economy. Wives, sisters, and children handle money, deliver messages, and act as conduits between the leader and the world beyond. In some cases, entire communities become enmeshed in the prison-based economy, dependent on the income it generates. A drug deal on the street may trace its origin back to an order whispered into a contraband phone inside a solitary cell. The connection is invisible, but it is real, and it gives the leader power over people who may not even know his name. This blending of prison and community creates an illusion of permanence. Leaders in solitary become fixtures, constants in a world where everything else changes. Political administrations rise and fall, wards are built, closed, or privatized. Drug trends shift from heroin to meth to fentanyl. But the prison king remains. His authority does not come from election cycles or market forces. It comes from fear, loyalty, and myth. In the minds of his followers, he is not a man subject to time, but a symbol that transcends it. Killing him does not necessarily end his rule. Sometimes it strengthens it, cementing him as a martyr whose system will be carried on by disciples. Attempts to dismantle these empires are relentless. Authorities launch sweeping operations with dramatic names, storming cells, confiscating phones, seizing documents. Federal indictments aim to cut off the head of the snake. For a time the machine sputters, soldiers are arrested, lieutenants flipped, lieutenants killed. Yet somehow the system reconstitutes itself. Like water poured over stone, it flows around obstacles, finding new channels. The resilience comes not from the strength of one man, but from the way power has been diffused through layers of hierarchy and culture. To kill the gang, one would have to kill the conditions that gave birth to it: poverty, violence, corruption, and neglect. The state can target symptoms, but it cannot reach the roots. Meanwhile, the solitary kings adapt. They adopt encrypted messaging, anonymous financial systems, and even legal tools. Some direct their soldiers to pursue legitimate business fronts, construction companies, car dealerships, music labels, as ways to launder money and secure influence outside prison walls. They operate as shadow entrepreneurs, competing with lawful enterprises, blurring the line between criminal and legitimate economies. The irony deepens. Men stripped of freedom build businesses larger and more sophisticated than many free men ever could. For the public, this reality is almost invisible. The average citizen assumes that prison means removal from society, that solitary means the end of influence. They picture men wasting away in silence. The truth is more disturbing. Entire neighborhoods are governed by orders traced back to isolation cells. Drug markets rise and fall on the decisions of men locked away for life. Violence in distant cities may be triggered by a feud that began between two men staring at concrete walls. The reach of solitary kings extends further than the walls, further than the fences, further than the imagination of those who built them. In this light, solitary confinement is revealed not as a solution, but as a stage. It is the theater in which power plays are performed in their purest form. The audience is both inside and outside the walls, and the actors are both prisoners and guards. The curtain never falls. Each day is another act, another demonstration of how confinement can fuel rather than extinguish ambition. The state believes it is silencing men. In truth, it is providing them with the quiet needed to sharpen their voices. The cost of this theater is staggering. Prisons devour budgets, consume manpower, and destabilize communities. Families are torn apart by the dual forces of incarceration and gang allegiance. Guards live in a climate of constant suspicion, never sure whether their colleagues are allies or corrupted pawns. Politicians posture about reform, promising to end the scourge of gangs while quietly acknowledging that the system itself feeds them. The cycle turns endlessly, with solitary kings watching from their cells, amused by the futility of it all. Perhaps the most haunting question is whether dismantling these empires is even possible. The tools of repression have already failed. Transfers spread the problem, Lockdowns strengthen it. Solitary intensifies it. Corruption sustains it. The gangs are not merely parasites on the prison system, they are symbiotic with it. To eliminate them would require dismantling and rebuilding the very structures of incarceration, reimagining justice in ways that reach beyond cages and concrete. Until then, the kings will rule because the kingdom is not theirs alone. It is the state's creation, and the state is unwilling or unable to destroy it. In the end, the story of prison kings is not one of confinement, but of expansion. It is a story of men who turned punishment into opportunity, who built empires from silence, who governed from cages meant to erase them. It is a story that reveals uncomfortable truths about power, resilience, and the failures of justice. And it is a story that continues night after night, in the narrow cells where solitary confinement was supposed to be the end of everything. For some, it became the beginning. In the public imagination, solitary confinement is the end of the line, a place where voices fade, where men are erased from relevance, where time itself breaks the human spirit. Yet we've seen that for some, the silence becomes strategy, the cage becomes a throne, and the punishment becomes a tool of power. Behind the steel doors and endless surveillance, entire economies thrive. Orders slip through cracks in the system, whispered into contraband phones, passed through coded notes, carried in the mouths of terrified messengers. The state locks men away to end their influence, but the effect is often the reverse. It sharpens them, it centralizes their power, and it proves again and again that control does not depend on freedom. For those who live under the shadow of these prison kings, whether inmates on the yard, families on the outside, or communities caught in the web of their networks, there is no escape. Their laws are written in blood, their incentives in fear, and their reach inescapable. So the next time you pass by a high wall topped with razor wire, remember, those cells do not just contain men. They contain governments of their own, empires that grow in silence, and voices that will never truly be silenced. Sleep well, if you can.